The Mississippi was more than a river. It was a living soul breathing mist and memories. Its waters swallowed secrets and whispered lullabies to those brave enough to listen. In 1858, when towns along its banks were little more than clusters of wooden homes and prayer, the river decided who lived and who vanished. Every man feared it, every mother cursed it, and every child was warned to stay away once the fog began to crawl in. And yet, one man made his life upon it, Elias Ward, the ferryman. No one knew where he came from, or if he had family. He lived in a small shack near the crossing, where the river widened and turned cruel. His ferry, an old creaking flatboat, bore the scars of countless storms. But what made Elias a legend wasn't his skill, it was his price. He never took coins, never accepted gold. When travelers asked what he wanted for passage, he would look up with eyes full of rivers and ghosts and say softly, "A child must ride first." No one knew why. No one dared ask twice. The fog rolled in early that evening, thick as milk, swallowing the trees and the world beyond the shore. A merchant with 2 wagons approached the ferry. His horses shivered. "How much for crossing?" he called. Elias appeared from the fog like a ghost himself, tall, thin, and weathered by the years. "Depends," he said, voice gravelly. "You got children?" The merchant frowned. "Ain't got time for games, old man. I'll pay in silver." Elias shook his head. "The river doesn't care for silver." The merchant's men whispered nervously. They'd heard the stories, how the ferryman once refused a rich plantation owner who tried to pay in gold coins. The man crossed elsewhere that night and was never seen again. The merchant finally sighed. "I've got my boy with me," he said, pointing to a lad of about 10. "He rides first, then?" Elias nodded solemnly. The river remembers children. That night the merchant and his men watched as the boy rode alone, Elias rowing through the fog. When they returned, the boy was pale and quiet, but alive. "Did he hurt you, son?" the father demanded. The boy only whispered, "He showed me lights under the water, like stars." The merchant didn't sleep that night. 3 weeks later, under a rust-colored sunset, a woman in black came walking down the path, a widow named Mary Latham. Her son Thomas held her hand tightly. They had walked for miles from Vicksburg after losing everything to debt and illness. When they reached the ferry, the river looked wide and endless. Elias stood at the edge, lantern swinging. "I need to cross," Mary said, her voice trembling. Elias nodded. "Do you know my price?" "I've heard the stories," she said softly, "but I don't understand them." He looked at the boy, then back at her. "Your son must go first." Mary hesitated. Her fingers clutched Thomas's shoulder. "He's just a child. Can't I go with him?" "The river won't allow it," Elias said, his voice like a prayer. "He rides alone." Thomas looked up at his mother and whispered, "It's okay, Mama. I'll be right back." And before she could stop him, he stepped onto the ferry. The fog swallowed them whole. The river was eerily calm as Elias rode deeper into the mist. The boy sat quietly, eyes wide, clutching his knees. "Are you scared?" Elias asked. Thomas nodded. "A little." "Don't be." The river listens better to children than to men. Through the fog, Thomas began to see faint shapes, flickers of light beneath the water, like tiny lanterns. "What are those?" he whispered. Elias smiled sadly. "Those are the ones who never made it home. The river keeps them." Thomas felt a strange warmth, not fear but peace. For a moment he thought he saw his father's face reflected in the water, smiling faintly. When they reached the far bank, Elias spoke quietly. "The river remembers innocence. It forgets greed, but never love." He turned the boat around and rowed back to Mary, who was weeping on the shore. Thomas leapt into her arms, whispering, "Mama, Papa's not gone. He's on the other side," and though Mary didn't understand, her heart began to believe. By the end of that summer, stories of Elias Ward spread along every bend of the Mississippi. Some said he was a guardian. Others said he was cursed, a man bound to the river for some old sin. But there was one thing everyone agreed on. Every child who rode his ferry first came back changed. They didn't talk much, didn't play rough, and seemed to see more than others. One boy told his mother that the ferryman talks without moving his lips. Another said, he knows what heaven smells like. And Elias himself, once strong and hard, began to grow frail as if each crossing took a piece of him. When someone asked why he did it, he answered only, "Every child who crosses helps me remember what love once felt like." In the late summer of 1858, a caravan of orphaned children and a reverend named Samuel Pike stopped at the crossing. They were traveling to a new home downriver. Elias stood by his lantern, silent as always. The reverend, proud and skeptical, said, "We've no money, sir, only the Lord's blessing." Elias replied, "The river doesn't care for blessings." One child must cross first. The reverend's jaw tightened. "I will not endanger a child for superstition." Elias looked toward the mist. "Then you'll wait till dawn." "The river won't open for pride," the children murmured nervously. Finally, a small girl, Annie clutching a handmade doll, stepped forward. "I'm not scared," she said softly. "Mama told me angels live in fog." Elias nodded. "Then the river will be kind." He rowed out, the fog closing like a curtain. When he returned, Annie smiled peacefully. "The ferryman said Mama's waiting." The Reverend froze. Annie's mother had died 2 years earlier. After crossing, Reverend Pike demanded answers. "What trickery is this?" he shouted. Elias's face was pale, his eyes glistening. "There's no trick. Only truth." He pointed to the river. "That water doesn't just take lives. It carries them. Some souls stay, waiting to be remembered." The Reverend clenched his fists. "You speak of spirits. That's blasphemy." Elias looked him straight in the eye. "Then why do your prayers echo in the mist?" The Reverend had no reply. That night little Annie sat by the campfire, humming a lullaby only her mother used to sing. She said the ferryman had taught her the words, and in the distance the river glowed faintly, like hundreds of candles beneath the surface. Word of the ferryman of children reached nearby towns. Some believed he was an angel, ferrying lost souls to peace. Others whispered that he was a devil who stole innocence for power. Families who crossed swore their children never had nightmares again. But skeptics, mostly men hardened by the river trade, called him a fraud. Soon, arguments turned into fear. One man spat near Elias's shack and said, "You're stealing souls, old man." Elias replied softly, "I'm returning them." No one noticed the sadness behind his eyes, or the graves behind his cabin, marked only with wooden crosses, bearing the names of his wife and 2 children. He wasn't taking children. He was saving them, the way he never could save his own. One moonless night, Sheriff Colton Briggs arrived at the dock, gun at his side. "You've been filling folks' heads with nonsense," he barked. "You'll stop scaring decent people." Elias didn't move. "I give peace, not fear." The sheriff scoffed. "Then give me peace." "Ferry me, no child, no nonsense." Elias stared into the black water. "The river won't like that." "The river can't talk," the sheriff snapped, stepping onto the boat. Elias sighed and began to row. The fog closed in instantly, thicker than any before. The sheriff's voice faded as they drifted away. Hours passed. The ferry never returned. At dawn, townsfolk found the sheriff's horse tied by the dock and his revolver drifting in the reeds. That night the ferry reappeared, moored quietly. empty. When they asked Elias what had happened, he said softly, he met someone he'd forgotten. What do you mean? They asked. Elias looked away. A boy, no older than 10, waiting on the far shore. The sheriff's son had drowned years ago, trying to swim across the river. From that day forward, no one questioned Elias again. Those who needed to cross came with respect, and always with a child to ride first. And though the fog still frightened the grown, children began to smile when they saw the lantern glow. They said the ferryman told stories, not of death, but of home. The years crept by like the slow bend of the river. Elias grew older, his beard gray, his hands more bone than flesh. Yet every evening his lantern still glowed by the crossing. One spring afternoon, when the dogwoods were in bloom, a familiar figure approached. Mrs. Pike, the Reverend's wife. Her eyes were red from crying, her black dress heavy with grief. "My little Annie," she whispered, voice trembling. "She's gone." Fever took her last week. Elias's face softened. "I'm sorry," he said. She gripped the edge of the ferry, desperation in her eyes. "You let her see her mother once. Please, ferryman, let me see my daughter." Elias hesitated. "That's not what the river allows. It shows only what needs seeing. Then I need to see her," she said fiercely. "I have nothing left." For the first time, Elias's steady composure faltered. He looked toward the fog, where ripples glimmered faintly like silver threads. Then he nodded once. "Get in," he said quietly. "But understand, what the river gives, it also takes." The fog closed around them like a cathedral of ghosts. Elias rowed silently, the oars whispering through the dark water. Mrs. Pike clutched her shawl, whispering prayers under her breath. Then, faintly, a sound rose from the mist. A child's laugh. "Annie?" she gasped. Elias kept rowing. "Don't stand. Just listen." A small shape shimmered near the water's surface, a little girl, smiling, her hair glowing like light beneath the waves. "Mama," the voice called, soft as wind. Mrs. Pike reached out, tears streaming down her face. Elias shouted, "No!" The river tempts through love, but her hand had already touched the mist, and in an instant she was gone. The boat rocked violently, nearly capsizing. When the fog cleared, only Elias remained, holding his lantern tight against his chest. His face was wet with tears. He whispered, "The river always takes its price." That night, Elias sat by the shore, staring at the endless current. The moonlight revealed what he'd hidden for years, 3 small wooden crosses buried behind his cabin. One bore the name Abigail Ward, his wife. The other 2, Sarah and Nathan, his children. 20 years earlier, a flood had torn through their town. Elias had been ferrying others to safety when the water swept his own home away. He'd heard their screams but couldn't reach them in time. In his grief, he cursed the river and himself. For days he wandered the banks, ready to drown in sorrow. Then, one foggy night, as he stood ready to let the water take him, he heard a whisper from the mist. "If you cannot save your own, then save others. Ferry them home, Elias, one child at a time." Since then, he had obeyed, never for money, never for fame, but to balance the weight of his sins against the mercy of the river. One evening, when autumn leaves drifted across the water, a small boy named Samuel arrived alone. His clothes were torn, his eyes hollow. "Sir," he said timidly, "they say you can help me find my mama." Elias studied him carefully. "Where is she now?" "She went to heaven last winter," the boy said softly. "But I don't want to go there yet. I just want to know if she's okay." Elias's eyes filled with sorrow. "If your heart still hopes for her, then she's at peace," he said. "That's how love works." Samuel frowned. "You talk like you know heaven." Elias smiled faintly. "I've seen its reflection in the eyes of every child who crosses this river." He gave the boy bread, a blanket, and sent him back to the village. For the first time, Elias didn't take anyone across that night. He just sat watching the water, whispering, "Maybe that's all I ever wanted to know." By winter, the rains came. Not gentle ones, but storms that cracked the sky open. The Mississippi rose higher than memory. It devoured crops, homes, even entire towns. Families rushed to the crossing, desperate for help. The ferry was their only hope. Elias worked day and night, guiding mothers, children, and the sick across one by one. When others begged him to rest, he said, "The river's angry. It remembers loss. I'll calm it the only way I know." Lightning split the sky as he ferried the last group. Two children huddled under a tarp. The current ripped at the boat. Elias strained against the oars, shouting, "Hold on!" The storm swallowed his words. The ferry disappeared into the mist and was never seen again. By dawn, the water had begun to fall, and though hundreds died that night, not a single child who had ever crossed with Elias was lost to the flood. When the river finally calmed, the townsfolk searched the banks. They found shattered timbers, half a lantern, and a small carved charm in the mud. The name Nathan still visible. They buried what they found near the ferry dock and marked the spot with a wooden sign, "Elias Ward, Ferryman of the Forgotten." But strange things began to happen. Mothers who lost children to the flood said they dreamed of a boat glowing softly in the fog, their children's laughter echoing from it. And sometimes, when the mist rolled in, people swore they saw a faint light gliding across the water, as if a lantern still guided souls home. Decades passed. The world changed. Railroads came. The telegraph sang, and the river grew busy again. But the legend of the ferryman lingered. Old fishermen told stories by campfire. Cross that bend at night, and you'll hear oars that ain't there. Children whispered, "He takes the scared ones to safety." Some claimed Elias was an angel sent to watch over the river. Others believed he was cursed to ferry lost souls forever. But one truth remained. Those who crossed where his ferry once stood always reached the far shore safely, even in storms that should have capsized them. The river, it seemed, still remembered the man who had made peace with it. In 1903, workers dredging a quiet stretch of the Mississippi uncovered something strange. An old ferryboat buried in the silt, remarkably preserved. Inside was a rusted oil lamp, still sealed and dry. Carved into the wooden bench was an inscription, "For every child saved, one sin forgiven." The ferry was sent to a small museum in Natchez. Visitors often said the room where it was displayed felt peaceful, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Some nights, the guards reported faint sounds, water dripping, wood creaking, and once, a child's laughter echoing softly through the empty halls. No one ever found where it came from. In the summer of 1920, nearly 60 years after the flood, a boy named Henry Dale fell into the river while playing near the old crossing. His friends screamed for help, but when they pulled him out minutes later, he was coughing, alive. When asked how he survived, Henry said, "A man with a lantern pulled me up." The adults laughed nervously. "No one's been on that river in years." Henry shrugged. "He said his name was Elias. He told me the ferry's still running, just quieter now." When they showed him an old sketch of Elias Ward from a history book, Henry pointed immediately. "That's him." And though no one believed it, the river by the crossing seemed calmer that night, still as glass. Time moved on. The world forgot his name, but the river never did. Each generation told the story differently, sometimes as a ghost tale, sometimes as a miracle. But those who stood by the Mississippi at dusk when fog crept low and the world turned quiet, said they could still feel him there. A faint lantern light would drift through the mist. Sometimes a child's laughter echoed across the water, soft as memory, and for a heartbeat it felt as if someone unseen was rowing, gently, patiently, from one world to the next. Maybe Elias Ward wasn't cursed after all. Maybe he found redemption, not in leaving the river, but in becoming part of it. A man who couldn't save his own children had saved 100 more, and in doing so, he'd calmed both the river's fury and his own heart. Because love, like a ferryman's oar, never stops moving. It just crosses to another shore,